Good afternoon and welcome to the Leading for School Improvement Coffee Break. I am Dr. Karen Woodson, founder and CEO of Leading for School Improvement, home of the LSI Coffee Break series. This session is intended for current leaders in schools and districts, as well as prospective leaders of schools and districts who endeavor to understand at a deeper level how to ensure that diverse learners, particularly English learners, thrive academically and linguistically in the schoolhouse. This coffee break is part 3 in a 3-part series on EL staffing. During our time together, I'm going to pull the staffing curtain all the way back to enable you to understand clearly the connection between EL staffing models and how they relate to the vision of your school or district's equitable EL program model. So grab your coffee, a calculator, perhaps a little notepad and pencil, and a small team of EL-centered leaders for this 30-minute LSI coffee break on EL staffing. I am glad you're here for this part of our EL-centered leadership journey. So let's look at staffing options to figure out how this works. There are 2 big options in the staffing world, okay? We can determine our FTEs, our full-time equivalent positions, by looking at a straight ratio. Hey, here's a ratio. We're going to take that official ESOL enrollment, the one we just talked about that comes in on October 31st, and we're going to divide it by the ratio given by the district. So, for example, in elementary school, if I've got 600 ESOL students that were reported, and the district says, hey, in elementary, it's 50-1, that's the ratio. All right. So I take out my trusty calculator and I do 600. I'm going to divide that by 50 and it's going to give me, you guessed it, oh my goodness, that's 12 ESOL teachers. That's a typo there. So we've got to fix that. That should be 12 ESOL teachers. I apologize. That is a 12. If I have 400 ESOL teachers in a middle school, for example, and the ratio is 40-1, it's going to give me 10 ESOL teachers, and you can do that without the calculator. If I have 400 ESOL students at a ratio of 35-1, that's going to give me 11.4 ESOL teachers. So these numbers are going to remain the same throughout the remainder of the presentation. But I'm going to give you some staffing scenarios that will make the FTEs come out differently depending on what you're doing. So keep that in mind. You might also be wondering, where did these ratios come from? And if your district uses a ratio to calculate staffing, they should be able to explain to you, well, what's the rationale behind the ratio? What I have found is that it's rather arbitrary, or it may be historical, kind of like, well, we've always done it this way. Ratios should make sense. So have that critical eye, question, think about that. How are these ratios determined? So it's a straight, easy, this is the enrollment, let me divide it by this number, that's the number of ESOL teachers. That's example 1. Let's go to example 2, where we look at a weighted staffing option. When we weight our staffing, we don't just do ratios. Ratios factor in, but not that way. We want to consider the English language proficiency level of our students, because we know students at a lower level of English language proficiency need more time, or are receiving more time, more ESOL time to learn the language, whereas students at a higher level tend to receive a little less instructional time to learn the language. We want to factor that into the staffing model. Sometimes our school configuration gets a little weight. So for example, I could be in elementary school in a certain zone and it's given a more weight I could be a Title I school. I get extra weight because I have needier students that are impacted by poverty. Maybe a middle school has a certain characteristic where we can add additional weights. So the school configuration is another way to weight staffing. We can also weight staffing by the specialized programs for EL. So for example, if you have a newcomer program, that is going to give you additional weight as well. Or it could give you, it's not that it's definite, but it could give you additional weight. So let us go into the weighted staffing for an elementary school. And this would be a good time to grab your calculator, kind of have it at the ready. So in order to do weighted staffing, you've got to have a clear picture as to the vision for your EL program. What does your ESOL program look like? What is required? So in this particular one, I'm going to start at the bottom of the chart because it kind of tells us what we're requiring. So if I'm an ESOL 1 student, we require those students to have 250 minutes of instruction a week, 250. So that's 50 minutes times 5 days. That's 250 minutes of instruction a week. We're going to say our elementary model, well, we're going to have group sizes of 7. And then we're going to say for every 50 minutes of instruction, we're going to allocate a 0.2. We're going to allocate a 0.2 full-time equivalent position, FTE. So to think through this sentence where my mouse is at the bottom, to think through that requires us to understand our EL program model. What does the model require? What are we doing? Then after we understand that, well, we just add a formula to it. So to take this verbiage and to put it into a formula means for our ESOL 1 students, an FTE would equal the number of students, level 1, divided by 7 times a 0.20. This is how we operationalize in a formula what our model looks like. Now, when you go through this table, here are the English language proficiency levels. We have 4 levels. Here are the staffing formulas that represent how much instructional time students at these particular ESOL levels are going to get. So the amount of minutes per week. You also see represented the group size. So FTE, students divided by the group size, and this is a quantifiable multiplier that indicates the number of minutes. Over here, these are the weighted staffing formulas for a non-Title I school. But look what happens when we factor in a school type. So again, English language proficiency levels, non-Title I, but here I'm doing EL proficiency levels, and I'm going to make my group sizes a little smaller for students at the lower level of English language proficiency. So instead of a group size of 7, I can have a group size of 6. ESOL 2 is still a 7, ESOL 3 is still a 7, but you know what? For those higher level students where it's harder to move them to full proficiency in English, I'm going to have a group size of 8. So this is an example of what a weighted staffing formula looks like for elementary school. And again, the key takeaway here is that this formula is merely a manifestation. It's a mathematical manifestation of the EL program model that we want in place for the school. At the middle and high school level, it looks a little different when we weight our staffing formula, because at the secondary level, we have classes. Students take courses. So we have to think through, well, how many classes do our ESOL levels have? What's their instructional program look like when you are, let's say, an ESOL 1 student? Well, according to here, they get 3 classes per day. Okay. If I'm an ESOL 2 students, they're getting 2 classes of ESOL instruction a day. For ESOL 3 and 4, they're getting 1 class per day. So how do I come up with these formulas? Let's go down and take a look at how we describe the model. So in middle and high school, we're going to say that a class size is 13 students for ESOL 1. There are 3 classes per day. Each class is a 0.2, okay? And we're going to add a 0.1 for planning time because, you know, our ESOL teachers, we never have enough planning, right? So we're going to add a little 0.1. So that's going to be that 0.7, all right? The formula to operationalize this thinking is FTE equals the number of students divided by 13 times 7. And we're going to get those calculators out in a moment. We're going to try it out and see how it actually works. So ESOL 2, you're going to have the number of students. Your class size is 13. The multiplier is 0.5 to give you 2 classes a day. For ESOL 3, the number of students, your class size is 18. Your multiplier is a 0.3. That's 1 class a day plus the 0.1 for planning. And then for ESOL 4, your FTE, number of students, divided by class size of 18, your multiplier is 0.3. So this gives us a real meaty way to see that the budgeting process accounts for a recognition of an equitable model that we may have built in the school. Or if it's not yet equitable, it is the EL program model that has been built in the school. All right, let's pull it together. All right, get your little calculator. Here we have our official ESOL enrollment count. Let's pretend it was last year. And let's pretend that we had 100 ESOL students, ESOL 1 students. We had 150 ESOL 2, 210 ESOL 3, 140 ESOL 4. That should come up to 600. So let's get that out. 100 plus, 150 plus, 210 plus, and 140 equals, that is 600. So no typos on this one. We've got the 600. That looks good. Remember, that's based on the enrollment count from last year. Now, the total enrollment for the school in this elementary example, let us assume it's 900 students. But we just said the EL part of that is 600 students. Remember at the beginning, I explained a school can have a pre-K program. So the total number of bodies in a high EL impact school could include pre-K all the way to grade 5 or 6 if you still have a 6th grade. So that is 900. However, your EL staffing, your EL enrollment is only K through 5. You cannot count the pre-K students because from a budgeting point of view, from a legal standpoint, the ELs start service in kindergarten, K through 5. We just said we had 600, all right? So if we take the 600 EL students, 600, divided by the total enrollment in the school, which is 900, we easily see that this high EL impact school, 66% of our students are ELs. Look, that doesn't even include the recently exited students. We don't get staffing for them, but we know that they still have learning needs. They're technically still learning the language, even though they exited the ESOL program already. All right, so anyway, we've got the 600 students, right? The staffing ratio, this is ratio driven. We don't know where the 50 came up, but anyway, we got where the 50 came from, excuse me. But we have 600 students divided by 50, easy, 12.0 full-time equivalent positions, 12 positions, EL positions, ESOL teacher staffing, to serve 600 EL students. Remember, we're talking about that ELD instruction. So we're going to give you 12 for that. The key question is, if this is what you're given, how would you use this staffing to support your equitable school-wide ELD model in a high EL impact elementary school? What do you do with that 12.0? And if we were face to face, we can have a little dialogue about that, but we're not, and it's okay because we are going to continue understanding this staffing piece. All right, let's go to middle school. Remember, we said the official ESOL enrollment count for middle school was 400. Take out my trusty calculator, 125 plus 100 plus 125 plus 50. Whoa. Did I miscalculate? 125 plus 100 plus 125 plus 50 equals 400. That's why you have your calculator. So that is correct. That was the enrollment count, K5 ESOL last October 31st, let's say. All right, let's plug it in. Here's your ratio-driven formula. The 400 students we just talked about happen to be in a school of 715 students. So here's a middle school that's pretty sizable middle school. It's got 715 students, but 400 of them are ELs. 400 divided by 715 gives me a 55.9% or 56% of the students in that school are ELs, more than half. And I'm just double checking the math because staffing can be tedious. Yes, it is 55.9. I could call it 56% or ELs. That's a school with a significant EL impact at the middle school level. Here, the staffing ratio is 40, arbitrary. I don't know why this sample district uses 40. They just use 40 because maybe they always have. And so in this school, they've got 10 teachers. That's easy. I don't need a calculator for that. 400 divided by 40 gives me 10 teachers. You're in a middle school. In middle school, students follow a schedule. They have classes. How would you use those 10 ESOL teachers to support your equitable school-wide EL model that you're building for this course? Let's take a look at high school. Same number. We've got 400 students, just like in middle. Let's plug it in. So in this sample high school, let us suppose the overall enrollment for students in grades 9 through 12 is 1825. But of that number, 400 are in the EL program. So we can tell this is a school that is about 22% English learner, pretty sizable impact for a high school. So again, I'm double checking my math. I'm dividing that by 1825. Let's see. Yes, it is 21.9%. So about 22% are ELs. Here's this number. I don't know where the 35 to 1 ratio came from. It's historic. They've always done it that way. Don't let them tell you that, but they've always done it that way. And so here we go. All right. We'll do 11.4. Oh, excuse me. I'm going to do 400 divided by the 35, and it's going to give me 11.4 FTE. And again, you're in a high school. Remember, each course is a 0.2. Got a lot of flexibility with that staffing to provide a rich and robust ELD instruction for these particular students. I would say this staffing, is pretty decent. It could be better though. All right. Now, let us shift. We talk about straight ratio calculations. Let's go to the fun part where we get more into the weighted calculations. I explained the concept behind weighted staffing. I gave you some staffing scenarios, some formulas. Let's put them to work. So you're definitely going to pull it out this time. Same elementary count, the same 600 students. Let's take a look. So I've got ESOL 1, 2, 3, and 4 students with the same counts. I'm still coming up to the 600. These are the staffing formulas that I explained earlier that are weighted. And I explained how the weight works to operationalize what it is we expect from this EL program model. So let's do the math. Calculator, please. Let's go 100. I'm going to do ESOL 1. So I'm going to do 100 students divided by 6, group side of 6 equals. Then I'm going to multiply it by 0.2. And I end up with 3.3 weighted staffing for this number of ESOL 1 students. Let's try another. 150 divided by 7 equals 21.4 times, what is that, a 0.18? Yep. And I have the FTE at 3.85. We do round to the nearest 10th for 3.9. So we continue to take these numbers to plug them into these formulas. And we end up with FTEs by English language proficiency level. And we end up with a total of 14.5. Let's double check. Make sure that's right. 3.3 plus 3.9 plus 4.8 plus 2.5 equals 14.5. The weighted staffing gives me more staffing than the ratio-driven model. I don't even have to ask which one you would prefer. Let's take another example. Okay, so here are the middle school counts we talked about, the 400. We talked about the 400 students, and we listed them by ESOL proficiency level. Let's take a look at how the formulas work. So in this particular model, we have the 125 students. Take it out, check the math. 125 divided by a group size of 13. 125 divided by 13 equals 9.6 times 0.7 equals 6.73 rounded to the nearest 10th. This school is going to get 6.7 full-time equivalent ESOL teacher positions for the 125 students. Okay, let's try another one. Let's try upper level this time. This school has, this school has 50 level 4 students. Let's see if that's right. It's going to take that 50 for ESOL 4. I'm going to divide it by 18, okay? And I'm going to multiply it by 0.3, and voila, I get the 0.83 rounded to a nearest 10th is 0.8. So when we weight our staffing, we see that the total is 13.3 in comparison to the 10.0 that we get with a ratio-driven approach to staffing. Again, which one would you prefer? What is your choice? I know what mine is going to be. All right. Let's take it to high school. Let's pull it together. The same 400 students that we have been working with. You may recall that arbitrary ratio was 35:1, I believe, when we were looking at ratio-driven staffing. So let's take a look at how it plays out with our weighted model. In this particular case, we are still teasing out staffing by English language proficiency level, same counts. Here are the same staffing formulas. Let's try the ESOL 3 formula to make sure it is correct. So it is 125 students divided by a class size of 18 equals Then my multiplier is 0.3 because they get one class, which is 0.2, plus the extra 0.1 for planning. So it's times 0.3. And it comes out to, oh, my calculator went away. Let me go again. 50 students divided by 18 equals 2.7 times 0.3 equals 0.833. I rounded it to 0.8. When you add all of these together, this particular school would get 13.3 FTE ESOL teachers, whereas with the ratio-driven model, the school would receive much less, 10 teachers for the 400 students. Again, I ask you, what would be your preference? How would you like to see that play out for your particular school? So, what I need you to understand is that ratio-driven staffing, if you have a ratio-driven method, it's rather arbitrary. And I would encourage you, if your district does do ratio-driven staffing, try to understand the rationale behind it. In my experience, I've found it's rather arbitrary. And this is why you want to have good relations with your central office. Now, if you're a leader who's not the principal, you probably want to have these conversations with the principal rather than going above the head and getting yourself in trouble with the central office. Try to have the conversations, because ratio-driven staffing, it's kind of ripping off the school a little bit, in my humble view, because it's so arbitrary. It has nothing to do with the EL program model that you have in place. Weighted staffing, however, is equitable. Why is it equitable? Because students who need more, i.e. level 1 students who need more staffing get more staffing. So if you have ESOL level 1 students needing more ELD instruction, or ESOL level 2 students needing more than, let's say, a level 3 or a level 4 students, the staffing model accounts for that. So the big takeaway for you is to understand that these staffing scenarios drive budget. They're sort of theoretical, where you've got one, if it's ratio driven, yeah, it's giving you some budget, but there's not a lot of thinking behind how that budget is done. If you're dealing with some sort of weighted staffing model, chances are it's an equitable approach to staffing that has an eye to giving students who need more, get more. That's the whole concept around equity, giving each what they need in order to see that ball game, if you remember from previous sessions. So let us not get bogged down too much on the numbers, because at the end of the day, it's the school leader that takes that big pot of ESOL staffing that you receive. The school leader then decides how those resources are allocated to support the school's equitable ELD model. And this is why we want to take the opportunity to build an equitable ELD model, because it's going to drive everything. When you envision it, it drives everything from staffing to strategic planning to teacher assignment. It really allows you to do that work that is often overlooked around EL-centered school improvement. And this concludes our LSI Coffee Break for today. Please feel free to keep in touch with LSI on Twitter at KCWoodson101. You can also find LSI on Facebook at LSI Journey, and you may subscribe to our YouTube channel at Leading for School Improvement. Finally, I invite you to explore and learn more about LSI's EL-centered school leadership development approach on our website at www.leadingforschoolimprovement.com. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to stay tuned for future LSI coffee breaks.